we go. Ya'at greetings, shik'eh, aro shidane. Greetings, my kin and my relatives. I'm so happy to be here. And I love the slowness and deliberation with which you read our bios. It's refreshing to just slow down for a little bit and rest in. And I love the things that you shared too, opening up this panel, especially the quote you shared about to poison a nation, poison their stories. I feel like I'm gonna riff off of that right now for a while. But before I do, I wanna honor my traditional way of introducing myself. In the Diné way, we're also incorrectly known as Navajo. But we say, to start off, we say, greetings, my relatives and my people. My grandmothers taught me to see all people as my people, regardless of where they're from or what language they speak, to fight for everyone as if they are your people. And then we introduced our first clan, which comes from our mother. So, in American culture, you get your last name from your father, but in our culture, you get your last name from your mother. So I say, which means I am of the Tsétsêhéstâhese clan, of the Diné nation. Diné people are indigenous to what is now known as New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona, but we call it Dinétra, Diné-Bakeya, the people's land. And we share it with our beautiful Pueblo relatives, Numu relatives, our extraordinary indigenous nations who are our neighbors. My second clan is my father's mother's clan. So that would be the Tsétsêhéstâhese, or the Southern Cheyenne. She was from Anadarko, Oklahoma. My third clan would be my mother's father's clan, which is Tsétsêhéstâhese, the Salt clan of the Diné. My fourth is my father's father's clan. The patrilineal side is sort of the last one mentioned, which is of the European clans, Scottish, Scandinavian, other stuff I might not even know about. But in that manner, I present myself as a Diné woman. So, getting to this topic, this subject of, and I'm just going to walk around if that's okay. I'd like to be closer to people. This subject of storytelling and changing stories and new stories and storytellers, whom I'm so honored to be with each of you today, to sit beside you on this panel. I think that for Indigenous people, as you can imagine, our stories, where do we begin, right? We've been misrepresented in Hollywood. We've been misrepresented in textbooks. We've even been misrepresented to our own selves, growing up in these American schools, learning the wrong history about ourselves. So my generation is carrying on the work that our elders and our foremothers have done, which is to correct the record, to help educate not just America, but the entire world, because America has been the one relaying all the information about us to the world. So we are in a process of deep re-education. There's a million different ways we're doing this, right? But my PhD research is looking at the indigenous land management that occurred here in what we now call the United States, but which we generally prefer to call Turtle Island. America comes from the word, from the name Amerigo Vespucci, who we know was documented to look for people to enslave and gold to extract. That was his official business. So I can't speak for all Native people. We generally do not like to be called Native American because we don't want to be named after him. And similarly, we don't want this land to be called America because this land is about kinship. It's about interdependence. it's about generosity, it's about humility, it's about abundance. All of these things are the opposite of what Amerigo was taught as a child and what he came to embody. And so for this reason, we prefer Turtle Island, which, speaking of stories, comes from a Haudenosaunee story when Sky Woman fell from the sky and landed on a turtle's back and worked with creation to create this landmass we're on, to plant those seeds of corn and beans and squash and amaranth and all these beautiful foods that we have. So, but in terms of Turtle Island, you know, the ways in which this land was managed is what I want to talk about. We often envision indigenous peoples as half-naked nomads in a tribe huddled around a fire or maybe a teepee. I love teepees. I think they are extremely incredible, sustainable technology, but we don't understand that there were like thousands of teepees in a camp at a time. We had massive civilizations. Some of the largest cities in the world, when Columbus was born, you would think were in Europe, but they weren't. They were here in Turtle Island in South America, or Avia Yala, as they're starting to call it. And so we had these massive cities, and we also were not transparent on the landscape. We were not simply looking for a berry to eat or a deer to hunt to survive and eke out a living. We were actually architects of abundance. We actually worked with various ecological systems to produce incredible abundance. Right here where we're sitting in Kentucky, there used to be chestnut orchards all around us. These chestnuts were a primary staple of the indigenous civilizations. In the 1800s, they almost went completely extinct because Americans did not know how to manage chestnut groves. So indigenous peoples managed chestnut groves by spacing the trees far apart so the disease would not spread easily. Also burning in between the trees every fall. A lot of our lunar calendars, the fall moons are called the grass burning moon. So we would burn in between the trees to recycle those nutrients back into the soil, turn those dead plant tissues into ash, which would in turn bring fertilizers to the soil. It would also, bringing that charcoal into the soil, creates little apartment buildings for microbial organisms, so it created living soil systems. And then in their wake would sprout up nutrient-dense grasses. So in between these chestnut trees, you had meadows, you had grasslands, and all the early colonizers say time after time, it looks like a natural park, like just a park just was naturally created here. They didn't want to give credit to the native peoples who sculpted that park over thousands of years. There's a soil core just down the road that was pulled out of a Kentucky pond that shows the fossilized pollen of chestnut moving in 3,000 years ago. Like there was no chestnut in the record, and then all of a sudden 3,000 years ago, this chestnut influx comes into the fossilized pollen record right here in Kentucky. You also see fossilized charcoal come in right at the same time, indicating that this food forest, which included hickory nut and walnut, was managed by routine indigenous fire. And it's beautiful to think that this pollen stays in the record for 3,000 years straight. It never died. So these people managed to take care of an extraordinarily abundant food system for 3,000 years straight right here, which goes directly against the dark and bloodied ground theory, right? This idea that there was no native people here. They just would come here to hunt and then they would leave. That is a really cute story. Used to say, oh, we didn't steal any land from anyone because nobody was here. This is a colonial story, the dark and bloodied ground story. So we are, my generation and my foremothers and forefathers and four ancestors, they have been working very strongly to correct the record and say, no, we were here in great numbers and we managed this land extensively. We were not savage, we were not primitive. That denigration and that label was used by colonial forces to legitimize the way they treated us. Because if they're not really human, then it doesn't really matter if you kill them, right? 98% of our people were wiped out within the first few decades of contact. And so this is how we as colonial society, we sanitize our past, right? We say, oh, well, there weren't very many here. There weren't very many native people here. They didn't really have civilizations. Oh, and they came across the Bering Strait, so they're immigrants too. The Bering Strait theory has been unequivocally disproven. They just found human footprints in my home state of New Mexico, 23,000 years old. We weren't supposed to be there then, according to the Bering Strait theory, but we were. So I could go on, but I'm actually out of time. And I am so happy to just give you a little taste of the vast, beautiful world of Indigenous land management, the vast, beautiful world of history that has been hidden, and the excitement that we get to be the generation that changes the legacy. We get to be the ones that change the story. We get to be the ones to unearth these stories. We get to be the ones to find peace. I love that you work in peace and conflict resolution, because that will be the science of our times. If we can get that science down, we will survive as a species. It's actually not the science of rocket ships that's going to save us, or the science of sucking carbon out of the air. We need to learn the science of peace. And so I'm so honored to be that with you all today and to work towards that with you all today. I'm very, very honored to be just one more warrior with you in this army of love, to bring healing, to bring peace to our lands, and to make our descendants proud. So thank you so much.
My goodness. Lyla, you said so much. It's hard to know even where to begin to ask you a question in this moment. But I'm really struck because you started by saying that you wanted to riff on this idea that to poison the nation, you poison the stories. Which is to say, what you've just shared with us is that it is a story poisoned from the beginning. Because we continue to tell a colonial story, right? And you're trying to offer us a corrective story, a counter story about the ways that, as you say, Indigenous people have been misrepresented to this nation, to the world, and even to yourselves. And you're in this process of re-education, right? And trying to re-educate your communities and the world with a different set of stories that are about, as you say, kinship and generosity and abundance, and not the kind of stories that we tell in capitalist America of competition and scarcity and lack and greed, right? But when you engage in that work of re-education, right, you run up against those who will not allow for those counter stories to be told. Those are the stories that get banned. Those are the books that get banned. Those are the ones that get called unpatriotic. Those are the ones that get called critical race theory, right? Those are the ones that are disallowed to be told, right, in this place. And I'm glad that you name where America comes from, right? But we cannot tell those stories about Turtle Island in this America. I wonder, how do you persist in this work of re-education, given all that you're up against and trying to re-narrate a story that's been poisoned from the beginning?
Well, you could give a whole hour answer to that, but briefly, I think compassion is important. To be compassionate. People are scared to let go of their stories. We all are, let's admit it. We have stories we use to survive. Some of them aren't true, I shouldn't say all of us, but I sure do. Most of us have some kind of stories that help us get up in the morning that might not be true. And so you have to be gentle. You have to be compassionate and understanding. If someone is taught their entire life one thing and you're challenging that, understand that's what you're doing. It's a big deal, and even though their story might be completely inaccurate, and there's no argument about that, it's just obvious, you still want to have compassion and gentleness and unity, because we're all in this together, no matter which side of the table we're on or which part of the imaginary pyramid we're at. We are all in this together, and the healing of our own history is not just about my liberation. It's equally, if not more, about the liberation of colonial society. Because who wants to be an oppressor at the end of the day? And deep down in their spirit, you know? I don't, although I've done it, I do it all the time. But that's not what I want. So when we realize that my liberation as an Indigenous woman, Black liberation, Muslim liberation, the liberation of every single beautiful piece of this puzzle, every single strand of this tapestry of humanity, is also equating the liberation of colonial society, so we can be what we really are, you know, which is family. Then I think that incentivizes people to want to learn about this more. Secondly, I think it's really important to contextualize things, you know? You can't just say, oh, Amerigo Vespucci was a bad guy, you know? This man is the spear point of 2,000 years of open war in Europe. The Roman expansion, the Inquisition, the burning of women as witches, the British destruction of Welsh, Irish, Scottish peoples, the warfare that was going on created that scarcity story, right? Because if in that area of Europe at that time, you better get it or someone else will. And that's real. It was survival. So when they brought all those ways of seeing things to this land, you have to have compassion for them, where they're coming from. The amount of suffering, the Black Death that wiped out a third of Europe overnight, the amount of torture chambers that these folks were coming from. You have to understand that hurt people, and colonized people colonize people. And so I think compassion, understanding, gentleness, and love and unity are obviously going to facilitate this truth-telling process.
Thank you.